Welcome to Must See Films. This is a channel where I create video essays and podcasts to document my own study of film. My name is Darren, and this is episode 94. Today we're going to be breaking down and talking about Phantom Thread, the new Paul Thomas Anderson film. And to create a little context and to set the scene a little, I'm going to read for you a section of an interview from Martin Scorsese, and it's in the book Movie Maker's Masterclass by Laurent Tarade. And it's page 68, and here we go, to the book. He's answering the question, to whom do you make films for? Some directors make films strictly for the audience. Others, like Steven Spielberg or Alfred Hitchcock, make them for the audience and for themselves. Hitchcock was great at doing that. He knew exactly how to push and play the audience. So you could say that Hitchcock made only suspense films, and that would be true in a sense, but there was a psychology behind his films that made it so personal that made him a great filmmaker. These were personal films disguised as thrillers, really. As for me, well, I make films for myself. I'm thinking and knowing that there will be an audience out there, of course, but how big an audience? I don't know. Some people will see the film, some people will appreciate it, others will see it repeatedly, but certainly not everybody. So I find that the best way for me to work is to make a film if I am the audience. Now, for me, that sets the scene for this film. If you look at the body of work from Paul Thomas Anderson, it feels like he's not doing things for a mass audience. Phantom Thread, I watched it here in Scotland, in Glasgow, and it was a limited release. I had to travel to see it. Same with The Master, limited release. Inherent Vice was interesting because the trailer came across as a comedy and had a bit more widespread release, but the film didn't match the trailer at all, so totally different experience. But it really feels like he's telling personal movies about things he wants to talk about, and because of that, you get an artist really doing his work properly, and you get this intimacy in this film. And that's the part that's fascinated me the most about Phantom Thread. So what I hope to do in this podcast is break down some of my thoughts on the film. What I'd love if you could do is ask some questions in the comments below, or share some of your thoughts and ideas and theories in the comments below, because I've seen it once and there's so much to unpack in this movie that I would love to start a bit of a dialogue and conversation about the movie. So let's dig in to the new Paul Thomas Anderson film, Phantom Thread.
Will you have dinner with me?
Yes.
Let's start with the title. The title is made up of two words, phantom and thread. Thread perhaps referring to the idea of dressmaking and the craftsmanship needed with that. But thread's also interesting because it connects two things. The thread is the thing that holds something together. So what are the connecting elements within the film? You've got Reynolds and Alma. You've got Reynolds and his mother and that strange relationship, which we'll talk about. And you've got Reynolds and his rigid and very deliberate way in which he lives. And phantom, the other word of the title, could be referring to his mother, which is looming over the entire film, and is definitely a major theme throughout the film. So the central scene of the film for me is when Reynolds gets ill, and I want to start at that place. We see the vision of the mother, which was hilarious and spooky and weird and reminded me of The Shining and the twins just popping up out of nowhere. And it's the only point in the film in which Paul Thomas Anderson chooses to play with the kind of subjective reality of the film, and because of that draws a lot of attention to itself. So what's going on here? Let's see if we can unpack some of the meaning behind it. Alma walks into the room at this point, sharing the frame with the mother. She walks around, and as she comes back, the mother is gone. For me, this has a lot of strong symbolic power in this scene. Some sort of passing of the baton, some sort of replacement has happened, some sort of acknowledgement has happened. And it's from Daniel Day-Lewis's Reynolds' perspective as he's working through this relationship with the mother and trying to let somebody into his life. And so for me, there's a new wife and a new love doesn't exactly replace a mother, but it shares a similar space in a man's heart. And so there's that exchange going on here. And for me, this is so important. This is the central part of the entire movie. Everything else bridges off of this scene. Now, after Reynolds comes downstairs the next morning after being ill, and the crazy rush to get the wedding dress finished in time, I thought he was going to go straight to the dress and inspect it. But perhaps for the first time in the film, he chooses Alma over his work. He walks right past the dress and he sits on the couch with her, kisses her feet, and then, to make the fact of this choice even more powerful, he asks her to marry him. The part that I found very clever within the film, it was the fact that we get a very deliberate and slow push in from the camera from underneath the table, and we move closer and closer. And so what we start with is the wedding dress on the left and then the couch with Alma and Reynolds to the side. And as we push in closer and closer, we cut the wedding dress out of the frame and we finish on the two of them together. Plus the fact he's asking her to marry him makes a very deliberate choice from Paul Thomas Anderson, visually marking maybe the first time Reynolds has put himself out there in this sense and chosen something else besides his work. A very deliberate shot from Paul Thomas Anderson, since he worked without a cinematographer on this film. It's also very fitting that before he becomes ill, he is the one who rips down the dress. This feels like a very strong, symbolic, metaphorical scene. Since he was 16 years old, he's been making wedding dresses for his mother and different women, and he's never taken that step into marriage himself. So the fact that he tears down and destroys this empty, unfulfilled wedding dress, a strong connection to the mother, it makes me feel like, although unintentional, there is a metaphor for destroying the curse placed on him by the mother and marks the beginning of his acceptance of new love into his life. There is a crucial letting go of his bachelorhood because in the beginning of the film, he talks about the fact that he was cursed. And Alma asks him why he wasn't married. And he laughs in the trailer. There's a different reaction in the film. For me, all of this points back to a very intense and interesting relationship with the mother, which remains off-screen. The relationship, we don't have any flashbacks or anything, but it can be felt through the entire film. And it's very strange because he feels cursed by this person. It's a very strange curse because he feels loved by his mother and he misses his mother and his mother has taught him his craft. But at the same time, he's never been able to get past or replace his mother with someone else in his life. So we can still see this very present dynamic between Reynolds and his mother when he describes having a yarn of hair close to his heart sewn into his jacket, and he carries a piece of her everywhere. Now there's a line in the trailer. I didn't notice it in the film. If you did notice it, comment below and let me know where it was because I missed it. The line in the trailer was, "You're not cursed, you're loved by me." And it kind of feels like Alma would mention this at the dinner scene where she organizes a private dinner between the two of them. And the secret message is sewn into the princess's dress is never cursed. As she is getting married and therefore she has no curse and she can join the love with somebody else and she'll never be alone. So let's back up a little minute here. Reynolds made his mother's wedding dress when he was 16. So that means either his parents were separated or he was raised by a single mother. She also taught him the craft of making dresses and maybe a certain way in which to be very particular about things and be very obsessive about things in the way that he appears now. But that very heavily influential relationship becomes a burden when you see this very rigid way in which Reynolds lives now, and it makes it very difficult for anybody new to be introduced and accepted into that established life. But what's fascinating for me, and where all the conflict of the film is for me, considering that there isn't a lot of external conflict, it's a movie about internal conflict, and it's the idea that there's a lot of pushing and pulling throughout the movie of his resistance to change about this new outsider being allowed into his life, but also that really deep and internal need for something new in his life. When he talks to Alma when they walk at the beginning, he describes the way that he feels like he's been looking for her for a very long time. So there's a push and a pull between what he wants and where he is, and his ability to change and his ability to deal with that conflict, and that's what the movie's about. So you can tell how strong the mother was as an influence because she raised Cyril as a daughter, who is maybe my favorite character in the film. And she runs the operation, and she's tough as nails. Her character really revealed itself to me over the course of the film because at first I thought Reynolds was the leader and Reynolds was the talent, and she was like a mere assistant. But as the film goes on, we see how she sticks up for herself, and we see how Reynolds dare not mess with her, and we see how she must have learned from her mother figure how to be tough. And although Reynolds consults her as an almost mother-like figure, she makes her own decisions. It's helpful that Cyril helps Reynolds get rid of the first girlfriend companion at the beginning of the film because it gives the audience an example of the cycle of behavior that has been repeating over time. And then we come to the introduction of Alma. And she really rocks the boat in this sense, and it's amazing to see how she is not intimidated, and she is very resistant to make all of these changes to fit into his life. In fact, the glances that Cyril and Alma just exchange over the breakfast table say so much on their initial interaction. And the film really plays into these moments with comedy. The film has so many comedic moments to it. There was a lot of laughs in the theater I went to see it in. But Alma's lack of intimidation in this world is the kind of thing that allows her to organize a dinner for Reynolds after his walk, despite Cyril's warning and pushback against Reynolds' necessity to do things a certain way. And it's this resilience that ultimately wins over Reynolds. As she says that it's only a matter of patience until he falls in love with her again. Which brings me to another major theme of the film, which is in the area of what it means to be an artist. Paul Thomas Anderson and Daniel Day-Lewis definitely know what it's like to live life as an artist, trying to constantly develop their craft and the mindset it takes to be the best in the world. And I feel like some of that experience has seeped through and became part of the story, especially since both PTA and Daniel Day-Lewis shared a lot of the writing process and talked a lot through the development of the film. Being a master of your craft is one thing, but it doesn't automatically mean that you'll be a good person to be in a relationship with. The struggle to remain true to your craft and juggle the real life expectations of different people, and especially outsiders who want a piece of you, is very challenging, and it's easy to disappoint both areas of your life. In the beginning, we get that great scene where Alma is brought into Reynolds' country home and the sister shows up, which was hilarious. And then we get this very interesting scene where Reynolds dresses almost like a seduction, but it's a dressing of a woman. And Alma is doing exactly what she's expected to do. Reynolds is doing his work as planned, as the cycles have always lived out. And it's severely contrasted when Alma plans a special dinner for him, and instead of his usual routine, we see the very intense and comical way in which he has to adjust to the surprise. But the thing that seals the deal for me is the action that Alma takes to poison him. This is the part of the film that I'm still trying to get a grip of, and I'd like some dialogue or thoughts in the description or the comments below, I was worried in the cinema that she was going to kill him for the first time. So there was that anticipation and uncertainty in my mind, but it didn't feel right that she was going to kill him. So when it was just a poison, it became clear to me that she was knocking him down so that she could care for him and therefore have him to herself. And as a byproduct, we also got into this hallucination of the mother, or maybe a dream of the mother, because he mentioned it earlier in the film that he was having these strong feelings of his mother. Now, that's a central part of the film, and him working through that relationship is what's allowing him to have a real present love in his life now. Now, around this time, there's a really funny scene where the doctor addresses Alma as Mrs. Woodcock, and Cyril and Alma both answer in the position of primary carer, basically wrestling for position. Cyril doesn't like it because she's as rigid as anybody in the House of Woodcock, and when Reynold goes after this moment, when Reynold goes into Cyril to try and get rid of Alma because he's made a terrible mistake getting married, she doesn't do her usual thing. She doesn't help him in this regard and tells him just to really get on with it. I find this very interesting because, again, we see Cyril making the big boy decision, but also the idea that Alma is no longer one of those continual mistresses that she is now as a wife. And the idea of marriage being very sacred is a theme throughout the film. So I think that Cyril also has that thing and is unwilling to treat it very lightly. Secondly, because I think that Cyril warms to Alma, and probably because, just like her mother, she had to be very strong-willed as a character and refused to back down. And I think that Cyril admires a bit of that in Alma. Anyway, back to the mushrooms that we were talking about. So we see a few episodes in the film where Reynolds is doing his work, doing his craftsmanship intensely, and he needs social recovery time in the country to recharge his creative power. And when his creative energy returns to him, he is met with physical hunger when it comes back, and we have that hilarious ordering scene. And the physical hunger represents him getting back into the phase of work again after this deep and down period. Now, this is mirrored when Reynolds becomes ill and he gets hungry when he comes back into health again. Now, after Alma and after Reynolds get married, you can see that Reynolds is still struggling to adapt to life as a married man, and he chooses to stay and draw when she goes up the hills. And even in that initial breakfast scene that mirrors the one earlier, we see the buttering of the toast and the eating of the toast, and just everything is being held back by Daniel Day-Lewis, and it's all in the face. The performance is just fantastic, but it's subtle, but it's intimate, and Paul Thomas Anderson plays into those moments, and it tells you everything. But then we come to the moment where Alma's love becomes rejected again, even now that they're married, and Alma appears back in the woods, and we, the audience, know exactly what's coming. We're going to be poisoned again, and he's going to pay for how he was treating Alma. And so we have this very long and slow and deliberate drawn-out sequence of the cooking and preparing of the mushrooms for this omelette, and we get the sense that Reynolds knows what's coming, and it all comes down to one mouthful. This is the main part of the film that I would like help interpreting. So here's what I think happens. She cooks the mushrooms. He eats and is skeptical. And Alma comes clear. She tells the truth, and she tells him how she wants to knock him down so that she can make him vulnerable, and that she can look after him and bring him back to health, so that she can have a part of her husband that she fell in love with. Reynolds' reaction to fall completely over the edge in love with her at this moment, and seeming to indicate that everything was going to live happily ever after, is so strong in this moment that I feel like there's more to uncover within the scene. So Reynolds willingly engages in this ritual even when he understands what's going on. And is that because of Alma's honesty? I don't know. Now, there's also two things. So the acceptance of love within the relationship, but there's also the idea that Alma is breaking him down so that she can build him back up. And she's always been a supporter of Reynolds' work, even to the point where one of the most moving scenes is when she goes into a woman's room to rip a dress off her back so that she can bring his craftsmanship back to him because she doesn't deserve it. And the reaction from Reynolds is very passionate and very out there, and kisses her, which is maybe the first on-screen kiss that we see within the film. And so there's meaning in there in terms of that's an important action that she takes and the way that he responds to that action. So the fact that she supports his work is very important in terms of them being able to click and work together, especially since the mother was within the craft and appreciate the work also. So the part that I don't understand is why, now knowing that Alma is poisoning him for the specific reason to make him vulnerable, why now knowing that does he completely fall for her? Is it because that for his experience of the relationship, he gets to have both worlds? He gets to have the downtime, the ill time, that intimacy, that caring, that connection with somebody the way that maybe his mother had, but also part of his mother's influence, he gets to be nursed back to health because she knows that Alma also values the work that they do. Which really brings me to the final shot of the film. The credits start to appear over the image, and we see Alma and we see Reynolds working on a dress together. And for me, this is a happy ending. Maybe the happiest ending a cursed artist could ever have before the next serving of mushrooms and the cycle starts all over again. So there you have it. Just another example of how Paul Thomas Anderson has so many moves that you can't predict what he's going to do next. 3 ensemble films, 3 character studies, 1 drug movie, and then this, an intimate, funny story of love and lost family and beautiful dresses. So I'd love to hear in the comments below your how you thought about the film. What was your experience of the film? How did you interpret some of the things that we talked about here? And so one of the best things about the podcast and about this channel is starting a conversation about great movies. So comment below and I'll get back to you and we'll see what other people think. So there's a few ways in which you can support this channel if you'd like to. The first is to subscribe on YouTube. That's the thing that helps me out the most. Leave a comment, I'll always get back to you. And the second thing you can do is support on Patreon. Patreon is a way in which people can donate any amount of money, and it's like a tip jar for artists. If you enjoy the work that the artists do, then you can tip, and it gives them a bit of money to help fuel the creative technical issues that help bring on episodes, video essays, podcasts, website hosting, all that kind of stuff. If you'd like to chat on Twitter and ask any more questions, it's _mustseefilms_. Same on Facebook, same on Instagram. I've been sharing a lot more on Instagram recently about behind the scene pictures and books that I've been reading and films that I've been recommending. So another thing I've been looking into recently is the masterclass video courses online. I've watched the Aaron Sorkin one, I've watched the David Mamet one, and I'm working my way through the Werner Herzog one. And one of the things I like about him is he talks about filmmakers as soldiers of cinema. And I love that phrase because that's what I feel like a lot of the people I talk to do. They study movies and they get out there and they make it. And so this episode and this podcast and this channel is a byproduct of my own study of film. And so the final message is to all the soldiers of cinema: putting in the work, studying the craft, full of ambition, keep going.